to mess up the setup here. All right, so I can see the chat here. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to throw them into the chat or to raise a hand or just turn on your microphone and ask. We're going to be doing an activity together. We're going to, looks like we've got enough to do some breakout groups. So we'll be doing breakout groups several times during the session today. And yeah, so creativity and innovation. Let me introduce myself a little bit and some of the reasons why I love talking about this stuff. And then we'll get into what we're going to do with that. So let's go. As Amy mentioned, I'm in the College of Business. I'm an associate professor of management there. And my background is all my training has been in psychology, and something that depending on where you are in the world is either called industrial and organizational psychology, or kind of the European model is the work in organizational psychology. The people in the field have far too many debates about what we should actually call the field. I like to just call it organizational psychology. And before coming to JMU in 2016, I was actually in England for 3 years, and I got to work with all different kinds of students there, from undergraduates to MBA to, we had a program that was for IBM managers throughout Eastern Europe. And some of those students actually asked me one time, they made 2 requests of me. They said, please don't use as many cultural references from America. I said, okay, that makes sense. And then they asked me to not smile as much. I don't know why, but anyway, so I was there for 3 years, and then came out to JMU, and just absolutely loved being here at JMU. Aside from teaching and doing research, my primary area of research, by the way, is human creativity. That's the research that I publish. I'm on the editorial review board of the Creativity Research Journal. But aside from doing that, I love getting to work with practitioners. So I've done creativity training and leadership training with the National Health Service in the UK, big energy companies here in the US, and organizations in other industries as well, and both private and public. And just really a privilege for me to be able to collaborate with people in all different kinds of sectors. Outside of work, I have a few kids. My wife and I have 6 kids, and ranging from about 16 down to 2. And our now 4-year-old has an ultra rare genetic disease. I bring that up just because it's been something in our lives that has was totally unexpected. Obviously, no one ever really plans for that, but it's been interesting to see how our other kids and us, how we had to adapt to that. And I like thinking about creativity, and that's required a lot of creative solutions in that. So still outside of my academic work and my family, I'm also a woodworker, and I love building things. These are some of the things that I've built. I build furniture. I've got some tables in a restaurant, and then fanciful. These are playhouse buildings that have taken entirely too long to build, but I built all these from scratch. And I just really enjoy getting to do creative things in lots of different areas. And so yeah, well, let's get into team innovation and creativity. So we're going to start. There are 2 roadblocks to teams being innovative, and these are pretty big roadblocks. We want to be creative. We want to use teams to do so, but there are 2 big things that stand in the way of that. And the first one is our instincts. Whenever we try to solve problems, or whenever we're trying to be creative, and whether we call it creativity or cleverness or being a genius or whatever, our instincts actually get in the way. And what I mean by that is the way that we intuitively approach problem solving is makes us trip over ourselves. It gets in the way of what we could be doing. In other words, being creative requires us to do things that are not intuitive, to learn new things. Study after study has shown that if we just leave people to their own devices, just let them approach creativity and problem solving in the natural ways that they've developed, they do things that inhibit their creativity. And so it can be chaotic and inefficient. So as an analogy, imagine you're in the middle of an unfamiliar forest, okay? And someone asks you to walk a straight line without using any sort of navigation device. Could you do it? Think about that for a second. So you're in the forest, unfamiliar forest. Could you walk in a straight line, just straight out? Actually, some researchers tested this idea. They took individuals one at a time, put them in an unfamiliar forest, and asked them to walk in a straight line with no device. And no device that they had access to. At least the scientists had attached tracking devices to the people so that they could see on a GPS, on a map, where people were going. They wanted to see if they actually walked in a straight line. So what do you think happened here? They brought people out, said, walk in a straight line. Doesn't seem that hard, right? You just walk and keep going. Well, they found that people actually couldn't really walk in a straight line. They found that people walked in circles, literally in circles, some circles as tight as 10 meters in diameter. And the shocking thing is that when they asked people, did you walk in a straight line? People were quite confident that yes, I'd walked in a straight line, even if they had walked in a complete circle like that. Everyone thought that they had walked, that they were walking in a straight line. So what would be really helpful, and what we pretty much all use nowadays, is some sort of navigation device, right? A navigation device, when we use that, can get us going on the path that we want. No surprise, right? But the same principle applies when we're talking about being creative. When people are asked to describe how they came up with an invention, whether it's a musical artist or recording artist that created a new song, or an engineer with a new machine or device, or any sort of innovation, when scientists have asked, or anyone, interviewers, if you look at the way that creators describe their own creative process, it tends to be kind of straight line explanations. They say, well, there was this problem that I was working on, and I tried a bunch of solutions, and eventually I had an aha moment or a light bulb moment, and then became rich and famous, right? So, but the reality isn't actually quite so neat. When scientists actually map the progress, so they'll take journals and diaries and or look at real-time progress of entrepreneurs, engineers, artists, and other creative people, they find that the path is a lot more complex and winding. But what's really interesting is that across different fields and industries, people who are better at being creative tend to follow some of the same paths. In other words, it's not just random wandering that leads people to be creative. There's actually a method to the madness, and it's consistent. Doesn't matter what culture, what continent we're talking about, what industry. Could be a violinist, it could be a mathematician. They tend to follow some of the same patterns. And so our solution to the first obstacle is that we need a system, a navigation device of sorts. We need a system that will get us to go beyond our instincts, beyond what we would want to do intuitively, and to get our brain to react differently, to do something differently when we're trying to be creative. So that's what we need for that first obstacle. First obstacle is our instincts get in the way. We need something that is going to get us to do things differently in a consistent way. The second obstacle is actually having to coordinate with other people. We want to use teams because teams bring so many different advantages, right? We can get more work done with more people, right? Many hands make light work. We can bring in different backgrounds, different stores of knowledge and experiences, and in theory, draw on those to develop something that is much more creative than someone working on their own. So that idea has been really interesting to scientists for decades now. And for a long time, scientists have pitted groups and individuals against each other in laboratories and other field studies to see who does better, who can be more creative. We take a group of people working together, what we call an interacting group, or a group of individuals working individually completely, and we just take the best of those. So does working together make us more or less creative? And the answer is we're almost always better off working alone, which is really kind of depressing and counterintuitive. So what I mean by this is when scientists study a group of individuals working together, talking to each other, interacting, versus just the best out of a handful of people, the most creative, those individuals actually tend to generate a greater number of ideas, literally more ideas than 5 people working together. And their ideas tend to be judged as much more creative, much more original, much more useful by people who are blind to the conditions of the studies. And this was perplexing for a while until scientists dug into why this was occurring. This wasn't just one study, by the way, this was multiple studies, and it's still true today. So what they found is that there's something that happens when we try to work together called process loss. And essentially what that means is kind of looks like this. So this person has to talk to that person has to talk to that person, and all these people have to talk to each other. And when that's going on, when you're talking or when you're sharing your ideas, I can't share my ideas. And creativity can be very sensitive to the thoughts that come into our minds. And so we need to be able to share those. And so what happens is that the process of collaborating, of coordinating with each other actually causes a loss in productivity and creativity. And so most of the time, if you were to decide, should I have these people work together or work individually and just take the best creative work, this research would say, just have people work individually. However, there's one very, very big exception to this. If we can put a good structure, a good creative structure and strategy, take that GPS device, if you will, from obstacle one, from our solution to obstacle one. If we can take that and use that to organize the way that individuals coordinate with each other, then and only then can teams outperform individuals and do so by a lot. In other words, having a structure to the coordinating process for teams is absolutely critical in unlocking the potential of teams to be much, much, much more creative than even our most creative individuals. And so we need a structure. We need to structure the team process in a way that enhances the creativity of individual team members and that multiplies the diverse talents and knowledge stores of individual members. So if we take those two solutions, a repeatable process and one that we can use to organize multiple members' coordination efforts, then we get what's called the creative problem solving model. Not a very original name, I know that, but this model takes what scientists have observed from artists, engineers, mathematicians, entrepreneurs, filmmakers from all over the world for the last about 70, 80 years. And then some studies that go, that are called historiometric studies that dive even further back into records and things like that. And looking at the patterns of when have people been successful creators? What are the consistent patterns that they use, whether it's on their own or collaborating together? What does that model look like? And that's what this is right here. In addition to being a good descriptive model, something that accurately describes what successful creators have done throughout history, this also has proven to be a very, very useful prescriptive model, in that when training focuses on this model right here, or some variation of this model, then what we see are much bigger gains in people generating more ideas, more creative ideas. And the research shows that we can get really strong benefits, stronger than, for example, offering people a financial incentive to perform more creatively. Teaching them this will do more than just a reward. Rewards are good too. I like pairing them together, but this will give us a stronger increase in creativity, just teaching people this model. So according to CPS, the creative problem solving model, according to CPS, all creative endeavors start in response to a question or problem to be solved. You begin by generating as many different ideas as you can. The bigger the variety, the better. This mode of thinking is called divergent thinking, and it's how you discover ideas that you've never thought of before. And while it seems simple, it's maybe deceptively simple. It's incredibly important to generate lots of ideas. And one of the reasons that that's the case was shown in a really interesting study 30 years ago. And what the researchers did is they brought people into a laboratory, and they said, look, here's an object, a brick, a chair, a newspaper, a paperclip. Come up with as many creative ideas as you can. Let's just come up with the most creative ideas that you can. And what they asked them to do was to think out loud while they were generating these ideas. So doing this think out loud type of study is a way to peer into someone's mind while they're creating. And what the researchers wanted to know is, what are the strategies that people are using to generate ideas that they've never thought of before, right? And so they found that 97.5% of people, the first thing that they did was go to their memory. What ideas have I seen in the past? So if it was a chair, then they thought of, well, how have I seen a chair be used creatively in the past? Or how have I seen a brick be used creatively in the past, or something like that. In other words, they just went to something that somebody else had already done, which by definition is not as creative as something completely new. And so almost every single participant in the study, and by the way, other studies have repeated this process and found the same thing, first went to not really creative ideas. And it wasn't until they ran out of ideas that came easily, ideas in their memory, that they really started to use a different strategy. And the other strategy that they used, only when they ran out of ideas that were in their memory store, was a deconstruction strategy. So what they started to do at that point was deconstruct in their minds the object that they were given to be creative with. So it would have looked something like, okay, how have I seen a chair be used before? I'm going to list all those ideas. And then when I ran out of that, my mind would start to go to, well, what is a chair made of? It's wood. Or maybe I'm thinking of a wooden chair, or maybe it's plastic and metal. And so I start to deconstruct the object into its elements and then use those elements to create something new. And at that point, that strategy was required to develop ideas that were judged as original. In other words, our brains are programmed to just go to our memories, and which by definition is those are the less creative ideas, unless we happen to be able to steal very cleverly from other people before other people realize it, right? But once we run out of those ideas, it requires generating a number of ideas. This is why we need to generate lots of ideas anytime we're doing something creative, is because we need to get the easy ideas out. They might still be useful at some point, but we need to get them out and get our brains to the point where we're starting to break down the problem that we're working on. So all of this is called divergent thinking. And when you're engaged in divergent thinking, you're trying to generate as much material to work with as you can. So when you want to break down problem spaces, the more ideas or thoughts or suggestions that you generate, the better. If you can do this right, you'll have way more material So let me say that again. If you can do that part right, the divergent thinking right, you'll have way more material being thoughts, ideas, suggestions, to work with than you can actually do something with. And then you have to evaluate ideas or suggestions. You've got to discard some and combine some and keep others. So what we have there is we whittle down, and that mode of thinking is called convergent thinking. So we have divergent thinking on one side and convergent thinking on the other side. And that's how you transform novel ideas. The convergent thinking side is how you transform novel ideas into workable solutions. Here you're thinking of what criteria you want to use to evaluate your ideas. You're testing ideas, getting input from others, doing research to validate the unusual possibilities that you discovered on the purple side of things, on the divergent side. So if creative problem solving was just generating ideas and then evaluating ideas, it actually wouldn't be all that complicated. We would just need to generate lots of ideas, whittle them down, pare them down, combine them, and we'd be good. However, divergent thinking and convergent thinking aren't really actually steps in the creative problem solving model as they are mind steps or modes of thinking. Think of these as different personalities that you act out during the creative problem solving process. In reality, you'll put these two thinking caps on many times while you're working on a single problem. First, you'll need to diverge and converge to gain more clarity around a problem. That's this red clarification stage. In the second stage, you move to transforming ideas into solutions. So you'll take the elements of the problem that you discovered in the clarification stage and generate lots of ideas, lots of potential solutions for each of those elements, and then narrow that down to actual solutions for each part of the problem. Then once you have a workable solution, you have to figure out how to best implement that solution. And that's what that third stage is focused on. And notice how there's diverging, generating lots of material, lots of ideas, and then paring those down and evaluating them and combining them multiple times, focusing on different aspects or different angles of the innovation that you're working on. Each of these three stages here, clarification, transformation, and implementation, requires a very different mindset. So you kind of have to think of yourself as an actor playing multiple characters in the same play, each with very different personalities. With each role that you have, it's like putting on a different mask, right? So we have these different masks here. So in ancient Greek theater, masks were used to allow the same actor to play more than one role within the same play. And masks worked by exaggerating unique features of different characters. Some look scary, some look happy, different emotions. And so a mask would allow them to emphasize a different mindset or a different personality. Today, instead of masks, actors adopt actual unique personalities and attitudes of the characters they play, even or especially if those attitudes are unnatural to the actors themselves. So apologies if I believe these actors are worldwide fame, but apologies if they're less familiar. But think about Tom Hanks and his ability to get into the mindsets of some of the roles that he's played: a slow-witted soldier, a cartoon cowboy, a man stranded on a desert island talking to a volleyball, an astronaut, a musician, a hopeless romantic learning to use email, and a Dutch musical entrepreneur. That was the Elvis one. Or Meryl Streep's ability to play a British prime minister, a Holocaust survivor, a determined journalist, a TV chef, an abusive fashion magnate, or a free-spirited musician dancing around on a Greek island. To think creatively, we also have to intentionally adopt attitudes and personalities that may feel unfamiliar to us. In fact, to think creatively, you have to become mentally versatile. So there are 6 roles that you have to play to be creative. They each have different attitudes and produce different outputs. I'm going to talk about each of these here, and we're going to see an example next of what these personalities look like. And then we're going to do something fun where we get to test putting on these masks. Okay. So in the clarification stage, we have the dreamer. The dreamer creates a vision of what a problem is and what an ideal solution might look like. Okay, so this is the first mask that we have to put on when we're trying to engage in creative problem solving. Then, as a strategist, you identify challenges that stand in the way of achieving your vision. These will be your roadmap. These challenges will be your roadmap to finding your eventual creative solution. Then in the transformation stage, you become an explorer or an idea generator, searching for tons of ideas, especially rare ones that can help resolve each of the challenges that were generated in the clarification stage. With a warehouse of ideas, you then turn into a builder, selecting and combining your best ideas to assemble into a creative solution. So now we've generated a vision. We have challenges that are gaps between where we are now and achieving that vision. We generate ideas for closing those gaps. And then we evaluate ideas and pick the best ones and combine them to produce solutions for each of those challenges. But to increase the chances of your solution being accepted by others, you have to be a listener. A listener is someone who can empathize with many different perspectives. That allows you to understand how different people or environments might react to your new idea. Then you create a detailed plan, translating your creative solution into specific action steps with specific time-based milestones. So because some of these masks will inevitably feel unfamiliar to some of us, it's helpful to play the roles, play each of these masks like an actor would. So you're pretending to be something that you're not, and that helps you get into a different mindset and let go of what your brain might want to do intuitively and get past those instincts and develop new strategies. In a moment, I'm going to guide you through a fun competition to practice each of these roles, and I'm going to give you a tool that you can take with you and use today or tomorrow after you get some sleep. Tomorrow in your jobs to organize creative meetings and coordinate your creative efforts. So, but before we do that, we're going to watch a short video of a real product design team. So I'm going to play this video here, and it's a bit old. It's from 1997, and it was in California, in the state of California, in the United States, close to San Francisco. And this is a product design firm that still exists today, and they're all over the world. And what they, as you'll see in the video, what they are experts in is not any particular industry, but they're experts in this process. In other words, they have mastered each of these 6 masks. So if you look carefully, you'll see examples of someone being an idea generator or someone being a strategist, strategist member. They're looking at, okay, what's our vision and how do we need, where do we need to go to achieve that? You'll see people being listeners, trying to empathize with people. You'll see people putting on these different masks. You will also see, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see them trying to clarify the problem, trying to generate and transform ideas, and to think about implementing their solution in a particular industry. So what they're going to do here is reinvent the shopping cart. Now, as I've lived in countries outside of the United States, I've realized that well, there are better shopping carts in England than we have here in the US. I don't know why we haven't adopted some of these innovations here at this point, but keep in mind that that the perspective that they're using is it was in the 1990s in the US, which was the metal shopping cart with 4 wheels, 2 that went straight. So they were going from there and innovating based on that. So I'm going to play this. If somebody will just confirm that you could hear the audio, I believe I've got it set up so you can hear the audio here. But if not, I'll fix that.
Tonight, the deep
Hear the audio.
dive, one company's secret weapon for innovation. We went to IDEO, the product design folk, and said, take something old and familiar, like, say, the shopping cart, and completely redesign it for us in just 5 days. ABC News correspondent Jack Smith tells us what happened next.
9 in the morning, day one, and these people have a deadline to meet.
So welcome to the kickoff of the shopping cart project.
This is Palo Alto, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and these are designers at IDEO, probably the most influential product development firm in the world. IDEO has designed everything from high-tech medical equipment to the 25-foot mechanical whale in the movie Free Willy and the first computer mouse for Apple. Smith ski goggles, Nike sunglasses, NEC computer screens. Hundreds of products we take for granted.
The point is that we're not actually experts at any given area. You know, we're kind of experts on the process of how you design stuff. So we don't care if you give us a toothbrush, a toothpaste tube, a tractor, a space shuttle, you know, a chair. It's all the same to us. We want to figure out how to innovate by using our process, applying it.
Project leader is Peter Skillman, a 35-year-old Stanford engineer. Project leader because he's good with groups, not because of seniority. He's only been at IDEO for 6 years. The rest of the team is eclectic, but that's typical here. Whitney Mortimer, Harvard MBA. Peter Coughlin, linguist. Tom Kelly, Dave's brother, marketing expert. Jane Fulton-Suri, psychologist. Alex Kazaks, 26, a biology major, who's turned down medical school 3 times because he's having too much fun at IDEO. Safety emerges early as an important issue.
22,000 child injuries a year, and so they're hospitalized injuries. I mean, there are many others.
And theft. It turns out a lot of carts are stolen. As the team works, it becomes clear there are no titles here, no permanent assignments.
And the other side says, gives us a lot of help, says, be safe. I'll give you a big red ball on a post, and that says you're a big guy. If you got a ball, you're a senior vice president. You know, what do I care? The desk, the red ball, it's all the same. In a very innovative culture, you can't have a kind of hierarchy of here's the boss and the next person down, the next person down, the next person down, because it's impossible that the boss is the one who's had the insightful experience with shopping carts. It's just not possible.
The team splits into groups to find out firsthand what the people who use, make, and repair shopping carts really think.
Okay, go.
The problem with the plastic cart is the wind catches it. Yeah. And these things have been clocked at 35 across the parking lot.
Oh, man, that's actually a pretty good point.
The trick is to find these real experts, and so that you can learn much more quickly than you could by just kind of doing it the normal way and trying to learn about it yourself.
From everything I read, these things aren't that safe either, you know? So probably the seat itself is going to have to be redesigned.
One of the interesting things for me is looking at how people really don't like to let go of the cart, except for the professional shopper, whose strategy is to leave the cart at various places.
3:30 in the afternoon, and the group is back at IDEO. There is no let-up.
Each team is going to demonstrate and communicate and share everything that they've learned today.
A shopping cart has been clocked at 35 miles an hour traveling through a parking lot in the wind.
We were in the store, what, 2 hours, and it was truly frightening just to see the kind of stuff going on.
You ought to designate some people to make damn sure that the store owner's point of view is represented.
After 9 straight hours, the team is tired. They call it a day.
So,
everybody cool?
Well, that's great. Thanks a lot. We had a great time today.
IDEO's mantra for innovation is written everywhere. One conversation at a time. Stay focused. Encourage wild ideas. Defer judgment. Build on the ideas of others.
That's the hardest thing for people to do, is to restrain themselves from criticizing an idea. So if anybody starts to nail an idea, they get the bell, you know.
The ideas pour out and are posted on the walls.
Oh, the blind, the privacy blind. Like when you're buying 6 cases of condoms, no one sees. If it doesn't nest, we don't have a solution.
Organized chaos. It's not organized. What it is it's focused chaos.
Vote with your Post-it, not with an idea that's cool, but with an idea that's cool and buildable. If it's too far out there and it can't be built in a day, then I don't think we should vote on it. Enlightened trial and error succeeds over the planning of lone genius.
Enlightened trial and error succeeds over the planning of the lone genius. If anything sums up IDEO's approach, that is it. Worried that the team is drifting, what can only be called a group of self-appointed adults under Dave Kelly holds an informal side session.
4 or 5 teams. 4 or 5 teams, and we give each team a need area. It becomes very autocratic for a very short period of time in defining what things people are going to work on.
If you don't work under time constraints, you could never get anything done because it's a messy process and go on forever.
Back at the shop, it is 6 o'clock, and the 4 mock-ups are ready for showing.
Baskets also can be, if you think you will have more volume, baskets can be put in.
A modular shopping cart you pile hand baskets onto. A high-tech cart that gets you through the traffic jam at checkout.
That you could mount a scanner on the shopping cart so that you as the customer, as you pull it off the shelf, would scan each item.
One that's built around child safety, and another that lets shoppers talk to the supermarket staff remotely.
Yeah, where can I find a yogurt?
But the adults, again, decide more work needs to be done before the mock-ups can be combined into one last prototype.
Why don't we have all the carts come up here for a second?
I think you take a piece of each one of these ideas and kind of back it off a little bit and then put it in the design.
The design is still not there. But there's another motto at IDEO: fail often in order to succeed sooner. And some of the team will be up half the night trying to put together a design that finally does work.
There it is! There it is! So we took the best elements out of each prototype.
The cart, which is designed to cost about the same as today's carts, is different in every other way.
What do you think?
Well, I'm very proud of the team. I think it's great.
Does this work for you?
Works for me great. It's also beautiful.
The cart's wheels turn 90 degrees so it can move sideways. No more lifting up the rear in a tight spot. And you shop in a totally different way. The bags are hung on hooks on the cart's frame. Remember, there is no basket here.
At first, I was a little shocked, but I think you have some fantastic ideas here. It needs a little refining, but I think that it's great. I mean, we would want them.
She also gave us some really good comments about how we can make this thing better.
A lot of hours. Also, an open mind, a boss who demands fresh ideas be quirky and clash with his, a belief that chaos can be constructive, and teamwork, a great deal of teamwork. And these are the recipe for how innovation takes place. This is Jack Smith for Nightline in Palo Alto, California.
Okay. Boy, I love watching that video. So hopefully you're able to see how at the beginning they were clarifying, trying to figure out, okay, what are reinventing the shopping cart, but what are the elements of the problem here? Where can we find areas to improve? And then they moved to generating lots of ideas, prototypes, and they had way more than what they ended up with in the end. And then combining those off, backing off, as Dave Kelly said at one point, and then figuring out, okay, how do we implement this? One thing that stands out to me too in the implementation side is if you have customers who have a habit of shopping in a particular way, maybe it's comfortable for them to take their cart with them wherever they go. We're now asking people to change their behaviors, and so you have to figure out, well, I'm not just providing a new product to people, a new shopping cart. I'm actually asking them to change the way that they're doing things. So that's part of that implementation stage, is how do we figure out how to get people to change in response to this product? So, and again, if you were able to notice in there, different masks, 6 different masks. You had people that were building things, people that were generating ideas, dreaming kind of in the beginning of what a new shopping cart might look like, listening to customers. And so now that you've kind of had an introduction to the different masks and been able to see an example of them, we're going to practice these. So we're going to go through, and in Teams here, I'm going to ask you to invent a new, pause for dramatic effect, a new alien. Okay, so we're going to invent a new alien here. Now, this can be a little more difficult than it might seem, because if you think about most of the aliens in science fiction, they tend to be humanoid. So a few years ago, I was presenting at the conference for the Museum of Science Fiction in Washington, D.C. And there was another group that was talking about, it was a group of science fiction writers and astronauts and planetary scientists talking about our notions of aliens. They all tend to be kind of humanoid. They've got arms, a head, eyes that kind of look like variations of humans. So most aliens tend to be restricted in that way. You can go beyond that. That would be potentially more creative. So your objective here is you're going to work in a team, and you're going to create the most creative alien. So something that's creative is both original, but also in this case believable. So it can't. You have to figure out how it would exist. So you could make it funny, you could make it scary, whatever you'd like to do. The process that we're going to use is the CPS techniques. Now you have a Word document, and so this is the time where you'll need to have access to that, because you're going to use that. And we're going to put you in Teams here shortly, and so you'll go into breakout rooms. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through an effective creative problem solving process using or in teaching you 6 techniques that can be used to put on these 6 different masks. There are more techniques out there, but I'm going to introduce these 6 to you so that you at least have something concrete to walk away from today with, and that you can use to immediately enhance your team innovation and creativity. Okay, so what I'm going to ask for in the end of this exercise is some sort of drawing or visualization of your alien. Okay, now if you're already imagining what that alien might look like, resist that a little bit right now, because I want to walk through. Remember, we want our brains to do something that our brains wouldn't normally do. We want to get past our instincts. Okay, so the way that this is going to work is I will show a slide or several slides. We're going to go through the clarification stage, then the transformation stage, and then the implementation stage. And so I will show on the slides here, and you can see in the slides handout that you've got 2 tools or techniques that you can use for each stage. I'll explain those techniques, and then I'll have you complete that the associated page, the technique in your workbook, the Word document that you have alone. Then you'll work with a team to share your ideas. And that process of working alone first and then together is one of the critical aspects of allowing teams to be more creative than individuals. Is when teams come together and start working together before they've worked individually, that's one of the mistakes that teams make. So one of the easiest things that you can do, one of the simplest things that you can do to enhance your team creativity is first do things alone, generate ideas, divergent thinking and convergent thinking. First do that alone, then do it together. You can be sitting down in the same room together, that's fine. But don't just sit down and start talking with each other at the beginning. That's one of the things that can undermine the potential for team creativity. Okay, so let me pause here. Any questions about what we're about to do here?
So, Georgia, we are using the Word handout, huh?
Yes. So
okay.
You should have that Word handout. You'll use that. So I'll explain, you'll do that, the Word handout individually. Then you'll be in a breakout group and you'll share what you came up with individually to together as a group create your alien. And one of the things that I hear as I do this exercise, I just did this a few weeks ago with an energy company here nearby, and one of the things that I hear each time is that as we go through it, you start to realize, oh, this is what's required at this step. So if it feels like you're really kind of outside of your comfort zone, that's okay. This is new stuff. Again, we're trying to get your brain to do something different than what it would normally do. So it's okay if you can't quite see at some point, like, okay, well, how does this fit in? That's all right. Just trust the process, go through it, and it will make more sense as we go. All right. So with that, let me go to the clarification stage here. And in this stage, we're going to put on two different masks. We're going to act like a dreamer, imagining lofty ideas, incredible, this alien that's just going to wow everyone. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I'm going to imagine that. And then a strategist, okay, well, now that I have this alien that could be so incredible, how do I come up with the details? How do I put this together? Okay, so we're going to put on these two different masks to create a vision and challenges. The vision is a description or the kind of imagination of what our alien could look like, what your alien could look like. And then the challenges are, okay, what are the elements? What's my checklist, my requirements here that I need to go through? Okay, so I'm going to explain two tools, one for the dreamer and one for the strategist. Then I'll have you use these tools. These are associated, by the way, with pages 3 and 4 in your packet. So I'm going to explain those two tools, page 3 and 4, and then have you do that on your own, then put you in groups. All right, so the first tool to use is called wishful thinking. So again, let me go back here. We have, apologies, I skipped these animations here. Wishful thinking and open and unpack are the two tools here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to use is wishful thinking. And this is a divergent tool. So it's here to help us get lots of different ideas of what our aliens could be. Okay, so we want to create a clear description of a problem. In this case, our problem is, what are we going to create? Are we going to create just an alien that looks like something? Are we going to create a backstory? Does the alien have a vehicle? What's the motivation? Is this an enemy or is it friendly? Do they eat people or not? So I'm going to create a vision of what our alien could look like. Okay, so wishful thinking involves a lot of imagination and then using two questions to explore what we could create in our alien. So wouldn't it be nice if, WIBNI, or wouldn't it be awful if? Okay, so we're thinking of positive and negative things here. And using questions like this, instead of just saying, okay, let's come up with lots of ideas, we're using questions. When we frame things as a question, our brains, remember, we're trying to trick our brains to doing something differently. When we use questions, our brains start to want to answer those questions. And so it's really helpful to frame things as a question here. So what this might look like is something like this. Wouldn't it be nice if my alien transformed into robots? Wouldn't it be nice if my alien was indestructible? Wouldn't it be nice if my alien warned me of danger? So I'm thinking of things that my alien could do, right? And then I also might think of negative things. Wouldn't it be awful if my alien ate humans? And in that case, wouldn't it be awful if my alien was indestructible? So you could have the same thing, be good or bad, depending on what other circumstances there are. But I'm just trying to generate lots of ideas, lots of possibilities here, okay? Once you do that, then you go back and circle things that stand out to you. So we're going to use our intuition here because that's a helpful piece in taking the just some of these ideas and carrying them forward with us. So for me, I like the idea of an alien not eating me and warning me of danger. Okay, so the wouldn't it be nice if statements, the answers that I come up with on that side of the page are things that I want to pursue. And wouldn't it be awful if those statements are things that I want to avoid? Okay. Final step here is I take any of the negative stuff on the right-hand side and I transform that or reverse it. So wouldn't it be awful if my alien ate humans? Wouldn't it be nice if my alien did not eat humans? Or maybe I could say, wouldn't it be nice if my alien ate toxic waste, right? So you can see right there, while I'm transforming the negatives into positives, it can still help me to generate more ideas. Okay, so with this one, wishful thinking, what we're doing is we're asking ourselves two questions. And remember, when we're generating ideas, we want to get past what our memories, we want to exhaust what's in our memory and go beyond that. And so we want to come up with lots of them. That might mean 10, it might mean 20 ideas. We want to kind of come up with as many as we can. Okay, so in a moment, you're going to do that individually before you work with your team. Okay. The next tool after wishful thinking is open and unpack. And here, the purpose is to take those wouldn't it be nice if things and wouldn't it be awful if things, those what could our alien be, and figure out how do we get there? Like, what do we need to do? What's stopping us? So we select a wish. A wish is one of those things that we circled in the last step in the wishful thinking step. So we take one of those, we put that on a paper here, and then we ask ourselves, again, we're going to use questions to get our brains to do things differently. We're going to ask ourselves, well, why? Why do I want this? Or why else do I want that? So we keep digging. And then we turn those answers into how questions. I'm going to show you what this looks like here in a second. Okay, so we'll say, oh, how do I do this? Okay, and then we ask, what's stopping me from doing this? Okay, and the challenges that we come up with, what's stopping me, or how do we do this? Those answers to those questions are our challenges. In other words, our checklist that we're going to take and move into the next step. Okay, so then we select challenges to keep in advance. So what that might look like is here are a couple of the wishes that I circled from the last step. Wouldn't it be nice if my alien ate toxic waste? And would it be nice if my alien traveled faster than light? Okay. From there, I say, well, why? Or what's stopping me? Why do I want my alien to eat toxic waste? Well, that'd be nice. It would help solve a widespread problem. We could get into some space exploration, maybe with finding more toxic waste. Faster than light travel. There's a burger restaurant that I grew up in Southern California. There's a burger restaurant out there. And so honestly, I want an alien that has faster than light travel so I can get that burger out here on the East Coast because we don't have it here. I checked like 2 days ago to see if they were opening up a location out here. They're not. I'd like faster than light travel. Wouldn't it be nice if faster than light travel because, or what's stopping me from that? Physics, right? So we can't do that yet. So then I take those answers and I say, okay, how could, looking at the top row here, wouldn't it be nice if my alien ate toxic waste? Why? Because that would solve a widespread problem. Okay, well, how would I do that? Maybe we could employ aliens at nuclear facilities and they could eat toxic waste and help with that. And so I'm taking my wishes and digging into them and turning them into, well, how do I do this? That's what I want to get to is, how am I going to do this? Because if I can ask a how question, then in the next step, I can start to generate ideas for how to do that. Okay. So the two tools that we're using here are wishful thinking, right? And open and unpack. Wishful thinking, that's page 3, and then open and unpack is page 4. In your Word document, I want you to start imagining your alien now and go through those two tools. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do that on your own, and then about 5 to 10 minutes to do that together in a breakout group. Any questions before you do that? All right, so I'm going to start. Oh, do we have a question?
Yes. Please, I think we had different documents. Can you elaborate on the exact document that you are talking about, and if you could give a little bit clarification on it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Let me share the document here. So it's this Word document. Okay. And then if you scroll down page 3, you have the wishful thinking tool. So here's, wouldn't it be nice if, and wouldn't it be awful if? So you're just going to write your options here. Wouldn't it be nice if my alien, what did I say? Wouldn't it be awful if ate humans was one of mine. Wouldn't it be nice if it ate toxic waste? Right. So you're just going to fill that in as much as you can before you work with your team. And then once you have those and you've selected some, you'll take some of those. I'm going to copy that one. And that's my wish here. Wouldn't it be nice if it ate toxic waste? So why do I want it to do that? And then, like I was going through with the slides there, you'll put those there and you're going to get to how questions. How can we get this to happen? And that's our goal, is to end up with several how questions there for different wishes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Fantastic. So Rich, do you have that file that I'm showing here?
Let me check it a bit.
I'm going to put it in the chat right here. So I just put it in the chat. Everyone should, if you don't have it, Charlie sent it out through email this morning. If you don't have it, then I say this morning, it's morning for me. If you don't have it there in email, now you should have it in the chat.
Oh yeah, we have it. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, so take a few minutes and go through that on your own first, and then we'll put you in breakout groups. And then once you're in a breakout group, you're going to work on that together. You should be able to access a whiteboard in your breakout group. You're going to start to collaborate your ideas that way. Give you 2 more minutes and then I'll put you into breakout rooms to share. Okay, I'm about to open the breakout rooms. You'll be automatically moved into a breakout room. And what I want you to do there is the first person to speak up, I'd like you to be the facilitator for the times that we're in these breakout rooms. What I want you to do is have each person share the ideas that they circled or highlighted, or however you did that in the Word document there. In other words, from your wishful thinking and your open and unpack, both tools. And so instead of sharing everything that each person has come up with, I want you to share the best ideas that each person has and put those together. You can have one person in your group create a new document that's your team's document, or you can use the group whiteboard or the group chat, whatever you'd like to do there, so that you have those ideas together. And I'm going to give you 7 minutes in the breakout room to have kind of a vision for what your alien will look like and a list of challenges. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? Okay. And then we'll move on. So you'll have 7 minutes. If you have questions at any point, someone can jump back into the main room and I'll be here to answer any questions.
David, do you work with X Labs at JMU?
Not yet. They've been on my radar since I got here, but I told myself I was going to wait till after I just got tenure, so I was going to wait till after I got tenure. So now they're higher up on my list to go and talk with them.
Okay.
Okay, I think everybody is back in the main session here. I know that went by so fast right there. This is actually a really good example of why it's much harder to be creative in a group sometimes, because if you were just doing this on your own, you wouldn't have to take the time to coordinate and share ideas with other people. But it is possible to go quickly. And again, what I want right now is just for you to get a flavor of this, a taste of this. So what I want to do now is give a few people an opportunity to share what'd you come up with? What are your ideas? Let's go for maybe three ideas. That it can be the entire alien, it can be an element of it. But what are some ideas that you feel like are more creative?
Are we starting with breakout room 1?
Awesome, thanks, Harry.
No, this hasn't been easy. It's been probably the hardest thing that I've had to do, which is surprising because I'm a sci-fi buff, but
difficult
in any case. So on the clarification stage, in terms of our wishful thinking, we're thinking that wouldn't it be nice if the alien can harness energy from the sun?
Yeah.
And that would assist in mitigation against climate change. And then would it be awful if the reason that they are here is because they destroy their own planet?
Right. Might end up destroying ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of our wish is that they teach us how to unlock energy efficiently directly from the sun to power the planet. And what's stopping us? What's stopping us is understanding their technology. How are we going to mitigate against this? Is that we are going to put our best minds in trying to unlock the intricacies of how they extract energy directly from the sun. And then on the PPC one, we said the idea is harness the sun's energy. The pluses is that we are able to gain clean energy, and then it mitigates against climate change. Potential is that it solves the planet's energy problems. It advances scientific research, and there's potential also for the sharing of knowledge, such as interstellar travel, and that it can provide a space where, the sharing of minds on a global level, that, countries cooperate and join forces with each other.
I can see a new sci-fi film coming out of this right here, directed by Harry.
Yeah, and then the concerns obviously is their intentions, as well as understanding their technology, and how we can overcome that is if we act as a global collective and we put our best minds into the task of trying to understand the aliens.
Awesome.
So that's all we've got.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Harry. And on behalf of Room 1 there, I'm going to actually, I got to cut our sharing short, unfortunately, just with time. I want to get to a couple more of these steps here. We won't be able to do them here, but I want to explain them to you. But I hope that what you've been able to see through this very, very quick practice is using these tools. It's just a way to get our brains to do something different. But when you do that, you start to unlock paths of thinking that wouldn't normally be unlocked, that normally with what we tend to do individually and as groups, we cut short. Okay, and so that's the power of these, is that they allow you to discover things that you wouldn't typically discover. And that's why they're very, very powerful. Okay, so we've gone through the first two stages. This last stage doesn't actually work all that well for the alien activity, which is why I kind of save it for right after. But there's two simple tools here that, again, I won't have you use today, but you have blank versions of these in the worksheets. So again, tomorrow, after you've gotten a good night's rest, you could start using these in your work here. So the last two masks that you put on are the listener and the planner. Okay, and the listener is going to use a tool called assisters and resistors, and the planner is pretty much going to plan, which more people are familiar with that. So it's easier to go faster. Assisters and resistors is thinking about, where am I going to take my idea and implement this, and what in that environment, who, what, when, where, why, how, all of those things. What are the elements of that environment that will help or assist? What are the assisters? And what are the resistors? And so again, with the shopping cart video, think of some customers might be assisters because they really want to get on board with it, or maybe the stores would be assisters, but then other customers would be resistors because they don't want to change the way that they shop. And so what we try to do with this tool here, again, you have these slides for notes with these steps there, is you want to take the resistors and turn them into resistors. And so that's why this is a divergent thinking step, is we're trying to figure out, how do we take these resistors and transform them or convert them into assistors? And so that's the assistors and resistors step or tool there. And then sequencing, we're taking all of our idea elements. We take those and turn them into a time-based plan. Okay, so we list the critical elements of our solution and the elements of the problem that they resolve. Okay, so we go back to the challenge and the wishes in this first column, write down the element of the solution that addresses that specifically. And then we create action steps for those. And we put those action steps, we identify who's going to do it or be responsible for it, and when that is going to be done. Okay, so one of the ways you can do the time period is take the ultimate goal, when is this going to be implemented, and divide that into 4 time periods: immediate, short-term, intermediate, and long-term, and then assign those out. So again, this shouldn't feel unfamiliar to you, but doing that is a way to translate your idea into some sort of action, or creativity into innovation. So that's what I've got for you today. Here's some follow-up reading I highly recommend. Grabbing some of these, you can learn a lot more about this model that I talked about in that second book, Creative Leadership, there, that it dives into much more detail on these. But I'm gonna go ahead and stop because I know you've got a short break here before your next time, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions that anybody has in the meantime.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us and getting us thinking today. It's a great process, and I know that folks in the YALI teams are already using some really creative processes in their RLCs, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to talk about these kind of processes and build on them. So many thanks for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break. So that should have us back here getting started at 8 minutes after the hour.
On the workshop today have varying degrees of experience with grants, and so I'm trying to give as broad of a view on this as I can, and I can certainly provide more resources if you're interested in looking into certain aspects of this on your own a little bit more. So A lot of these principles, again, I'm talking about it in the context of grant funding, but really can apply to any type of funding or, managing any budget or projects that you may have. And hopefully you then also received the email that Charlie did send ahead of time with some of the handouts that I'll refer to those kind of as we go. And there'll be a couple opportunities to do some breakouts and look through some of those and get a feel for how to possibly use some of those resources. So with that, I guess I should be sharing my screen here. Let's see. Hopefully, you should be seeing my PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So just a little bit of an overview of what I wanted to cover today, kind of understanding what grant funds are, how sponsors use them, and typically what you'll see is if you were to apply for a grant, it would be as a result of a funding solicitation of some kind. So you might have heard of something like a request for proposals or notice of funding opportunity that a funder might put out. So just to kind of recognize the key elements of what is in those solicitations, becoming familiar then with proposals as a means of applying for that funding and some tips that you can take with you as far as how to successfully develop proposals. Sorry, I think I might have just hit something on my, there we go, okay. And then learning about the rules that govern the grant funding. So once you do receive the funding, kind of what rules you need to follow, and just kind of what to be aware of in that context, and reviewing some best practices to then manage grants and projects that are funded by grants. So just wanted to start with kind of big picture, the different phases of grant funding that we tend to talk about. So you've got usually pre-award process, your award, post-award, and then close out. So pre-award would really be that application process of going through and trying to apply for the funding. The award would actually be receiving the funding. There's usually a process of some negotiation, discussion with the sponsor before you actually sign any kind of agreement. And so there's a little bit of a process there. Post-award is actually after you've gotten the funding, what you do to implement the project that you received the funding for. And then closeout is just kind of wrapping up and how you make sure that you're following whatever guidelines you need to in terms of keeping records and finishing out expenditures and things like that. Really what we're going to talk about is the pre-award and then the post-award phase today. That's kind of the main focus because those tend to be where you spend the most time when it comes to seeking out and then actually applying for and receiving grant funding. So again, bit of an overview here, just kind of what is a grant? How would you get one? So using the term grant, we're usually talking about a monetary award of some kind from a sponsor. Usually a funding agency is interested in providing funds to an organization to carry out some kind of specific activity. And generally it has a public purpose. And so it has some kind of benefit to the public or, a certain segment of the public, whoever the beneficiaries would be of the activities. So to actually receive a grant, you would be submitting some kind of an application. Often we're calling that a proposal. And might be referred to as a funding request. So just kind of a few interchangeable terms there. Basically, when you write up that application or proposal, you're kind of making a promise in advance to the sponsor of what you will do as the grantee, the recipient of the grant, to actually fulfill whatever they're looking for in giving you that funding. Generally, a term you might hear as far as who is managing the grant would be known as the principal investigator, or PI. That's just a term that sponsors tend to use in terms of who is kind of in charge of the grant at the recipient end. And just wanted to highlight that there are kind of different forms of grants sometimes. You may hear the term contract sometimes, rather than grant, or cooperative agreement, which is really the same as a grant essentially, but it just means that the sponsor has some kind of substantial involvement in the activities of the grant. So in addition to you being required as the recipient to carry out certain activities, the sponsor would also have some obligations on their end to fulfill in order to help support the activities of the grant. And the folks, I think, at UNISA would probably be familiar with the cooperative agreement, as I believe that's the relationship that they have with USAID on the current YALI grant that they've been working on. Oops. Okay. So some ways that grant funding might be used. So operational expenses would really just be kind of the day-to-day operations of an organization. You might see things like research projects or direct services, a pilot project to just kind of test out a certain program before potentially expanding it. Something that's more of a one-time use. So what we call capital projects, which might be to build a building or to purchase a large piece of equipment, would generally be what capital projects refers to. Matching funds. So if the funder, is interested in supporting something, but they're not going to put the full amount towards it, then the grantee would need to, find other sources to complement those funds in order to support whatever activity the sponsor is interested in funding. And then capacity building. So kind of developing internally the organization's skills, or potentially helping to support others to develop their skills in certain areas. Just wanted to kind of give you a range of different ways that funding could be used, and to point out that as I go through this presentation, I use the term project a lot, and that doesn't necessarily mean we're only talking about projects. It could be kind of any of these uses of grant funds, and certainly I feel like with YALI there would be several of these could be appropriate as far as what you might be interested in seeking funding for. And as we get to some of the exercises and the breakouts, this might just be something to keep in mind, as kind of any one of these might be something that you would be interested in potentially seeking out grant funding to support. Okay, so thought I would touch on a few examples of who provides grant funding. I tried to use examples that are mostly relevant to the audience here, thinking internationally, kind of who is supporting different types of programs. So certainly federal government agencies from different countries. You've got USAID, hopefully everyone here is familiar with, but there's equivalents in many other countries, DFID being in the UK, got the Japanese, German, Irish, are some examples of some bigger organizations that are basically the development side of their government agencies at the federal level. Obviously, any number of those out there as well. Then you've got international, the EU, the UN, the World Bank, certainly have funding opportunities that would be relevant here. Oftentimes the embassies that are located in various countries will provide opportunities to apply for funding. And then you have public and private foundations. So a lot of times big corporations will have kind of an arm that is for charitable giving and interested in supporting various types of grant funded activities, as well as family foundations, which would be more of kind of just private family owned foundations that usually have some kind of specific purpose that they are interested in supporting with their funding. So I wanted to kind of give you an idea of some of these different organizations that are out there. If you'd like, I can follow up with some links to some of the resources where they actually put out calls so that you can apply to for funding. So you can look at kind of specific examples. But I did want to kind of highlight that different sponsors often have kind of different interests in terms of what they want to support, what they want to fund. There are different regulations and requirements depending on who the sponsor is, different expectations. So just wanted to set that out because I will be talking a little bit later about kind of how that applies in terms of, who provides funding and then kind of what their goals are and kind of how that applies to then you as applying to them to receive funding. So with that, I like to talk about kind of why funders provide funding. It may be something we don't always take a step back and think about. We just kind of really want to go out there and get the funding and do the work. But, as you're applying for funding, it can be really important to think about why funders actually want to provide this support. So all of these funders have some kind of a mission, especially if it's international, it can be a pretty broad mission, and they are interested in finding people who can help them achieve that mission. Oftentimes they want to support local organizations that will have better access to the people who are being served, a better understanding of those communities and the context, so that they don't have to become experts in every single geographic area that they want to support. They just will find people who have that local expertise and be able to then support them by providing the funding to do their work. Finding an organization, again, that has that access and that experience, and they have their own staff, their own infrastructure, tends to be much more cost effective than trying to do those things themselves, to try and send their staff to different places to carry out activities. Non-governmental organizations or academic institutions often can be more flexible, can be adaptable to things as they change, situations that come up that might be unexpected and need a quick response. Then, these big government bureaucracies or international organizations don't necessarily have the ability to move that quickly to respond to changing and developing needs. And they can just have a much bigger reach when their funding again, these programs that have, you know, a base in a certain area, and they can fund various organizations like that, and then have that bigger reach globally than they could otherwise. So again, these are kind of things to keep in mind when you're trying to think about how you're going to persuade with your proposal that you would be writing to one of these funders. You know, persuading them to fund your program really helps to kind of keep in mind, why are they doing this? What is their motivation? What are they interested in achieving? And I think you kind of see here, there's a mix between, there's, you know, an idealistic side to this of wanting to achieve a mission and, you know, have the greatest benefit, but also a practical side where, again, funders can't always do these things themselves and are interested in getting access and kind of the benefits and results of what they would like to achieve out to more places through other organizations who can have that greater impact. So as you, again, approach trying to apply for funding, it's good to have a sense of what you would be asking for funding for. As I said, project here can have a wider definition than just a specific project-based activity. But some things to keep in mind would be wanting to be able to articulate what conditions led to the need for this project. How can you demonstrate that there is something that is needed that you are in a position to actually address? Being able to explain what activities you would do to hopefully address that need, what goals you want to achieve with your project, who the beneficiaries are, or what the anticipated results would be, you know, what would be the outcomes, and especially long-term outcomes is what funders tend to be interested in. Obviously, short-term is much easier to measure and be able to say, you know, here's what we accomplished right now, but here's also what this might have as far as implications going forward for the longer term. What resources you might need. Obviously, funding is the biggest one. That's why you're writing a proposal, but really it's more about what would you use the funding for? So, you know, having to pay staff in order to support the project, having to potentially travel as part of it, purchase equipment, just what are the things you would need that funding to actually do? Thinking about partners that might be of interest to involve in your project, you know, who is kind of best suited to maybe help you to complement what your organization can do to potentially bring in and help support a project. And then how much time would you need to accomplish this project? And all of these things are what you want to kind of align with what the sponsor is looking for. And so the sponsor will tend to tell you what goals they want to achieve, who they want to reach as far as beneficiaries, how much funding they're willing to provide, how much time they're willing to give you. So you really want to make sure that you're lining up what you will need in order to carry out your project with what the sponsor is looking for and what they're willing to support. And then always good to be very aware of what your organization then is capable of, what your staff have experience in, things that you've done in the past, successes that you can point to, outcomes from other projects. And then along the lines of partners or experts, you know, who's in your network, who do you have access to, who do you know that you can bring in to potentially work with, who would be a good fit for the project you're looking to fund. So as I mentioned, we're usually looking at some kind of an announcement by a funding agency when they want to provide funding. And so they're putting out a solicitation of some kind that will, you will actually submit an application to or write a proposal for. And so as you look at one of these solicitations, they can be fairly long. And so it's usually good to kind of try to identify a few key elements that are really going to be important for you to use in deciding whether you want to actually apply for this particular opportunity. So certainly looking at what budget do they have available that they're willing to provide for any single project. What is the time frame? Just the length overall. So, you know, is it 1 year? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? And also when would the project start? You know, you might be really ready to go and want to start next month, but they might be telling you we wouldn't be able to provide the funding for another 6 months or something. So certainly want to make sure that you're in alignment with the funder on that. When do you have to submit? What's the deadline? You know, is it due next week and you would really have to scramble to try and put something together, or do you have a few weeks, a month, maybe more, to really be able to sit down and put everything together that you need to, and make sure that you're including everything that the sponsor is asking for and getting into all these little details that they specify. Is there an eligibility requirement? Often this is one of the first things you want to look at, because if your organization just isn't eligible, then a lot of times, you know, you're not really going to want to keep reading, because if you can't apply just because of the nature of who they're interested in funding, then that wouldn't really make sense. There is maybe a way around that, where if you have a partner who they would be eligible and they would want to be the one submitting the application, and you would be interested in then providing part of what is needed for the project, and you could be a partner, then that's a possibility, where you as an organization wouldn't necessarily need to be eligible to apply directly, but you would need to then locate a partner who's willing to apply with you for that particular opportunity. Anything that would disqualify you, again, as far as eligibility, but just, you know, if you submit an application that's too long, for example, or that includes certain things that aren't necessary, that, you know, they might say, we're not going to read applications if they don't meet these particular requirements. A lot of times sponsors will specify how long each section of the proposal is supposed to be, how many pages is it? And certainly you want to be following those guidelines very closely to make sure that you aren't providing something that is outside what the parameters that they've given you. They will usually tell you how they're going to score your proposal. So they'll tell you kind of what the criteria are for how we're going to judge proposals in order to kind of give them a score and decide which of the proposals they would like to fund. So it's very important to look at what they're giving the most weight to, you know, which sections have the most points assigned to them. Generally, that's how sponsors tend to score proposals, is by assigning points to the different elements. And then, is it possible for you to ask questions if you have anything that comes up that you're a little confused by? In the solicitation, a lot of times sponsors will give you an opportunity to submit by a certain deadline. Any questions that you have, they might even have an in-person meeting or something over the phone where you might be able to I mean, I guess now virtually as well, online might be more common than over the phone, but just an opportunity to engage with the sponsor, to get more information, again, to ask questions. Always good to be present for those, even if you don't think you have a question. You might realize as they go through the explanation of things that there is something that you want to ask, or you might just learn from other people asking questions even. So that could be a really good opportunity to better understand what it is you're applying for. As you read through a solicitation, always good to kind of look for red flags or green flags. Kind of red flags would be things that stand out that really would make you say, no, we don't want to go for this opportunity. You know, if the deadline is too close, for example, if the funding amount isn't enough, if it's a really long proposal and you just don't think you have the time to commit to be able to actually write something that would meet that requirement. If the sponsor is actually requiring you to provide matching funds, and so you would have to come up with a certain amount of money to put towards this project, and maybe your organization just isn't able to do that. So those would be some things to maybe look out for. On the flip side, green flags, you know, things where you really feel confident that you would be a good fit for this particular proposal. You know, if your organization certainly meets the eligibility requirements, but then also, you know, just really has good expertise in a certain area that they're looking for, things like that, where you would say, this definitely looks like it's a good fit for us. And then finding information on how proposals will be evaluated. Again, kind of that idea of the criteria that they set out as the sponsor to tell you how they're going to grade these different things within the proposal, and try to prioritize then what you're going to spend your time on. You know, if a certain section is worth half of the overall points, you really want to make sure that you're focusing in on that and giving that enough time, as opposed to something that might be much smaller in point value. Not that it doesn't deserve your attention, but just it might be something you want to say that you can spend a little less time on something like that, rather than the sections that are going to be given the most weight by the sponsor. So a few things I wanted to highlight as far as what is the purpose of an actual proposal. So I think we think of maybe just the obvious purpose, which is that, you know, you're trying to justify to the sponsor why you want the funding and why they should provide that to you, and why your project is a good use of their money. You're also trying to persuade them that you would be a good steward of their funds. You know, you would put it to good use, you would manage it well, that you have that capability and experience. So as I mentioned, there's usually a lot of guidelines that come from the sponsor in terms of writing your proposal, putting together all the different elements and submitting it. And the fact that you can follow those directions and you can, you know, not go over the page limit, and you can include everything that they're asking for, is demonstrating to them in a way that you can follow directions, because you know, a grant that a sponsor would give you would actually come with a lot of different regulations and things that you need to follow. And so it's kind of you demonstrating to them that I understand how to follow your instructions, and that I could also apply this when it comes to using the funds that you're going to provide. And ideally, if you do get the funding, it's also helpful to you in that it's kind of the starting point of a roadmap to actually carrying out the project and starting that project management phase of, trying to go from just the idea and something that's on paper to actually what you would implement in practice. And so it is hopefully detailed enough that it gives you a place to start in terms of being able to actually carry out your project activities. So last thing on proposals here, just wanted to give you a few kind of tips for success when it comes to writing proposals. So really can benefit you to show that there is, again, some kind of a need in the community that you would be addressing with your project, and that you're in a good position to do that. You have the experience necessary. And ideally, it's also a good fit with what the sponsor is trying to support. Do some research on the funder themselves, on potentially your competition who might also be applying for funding, and then potential partners that you might work with, just to make sure that you know their experience and kind of what they would bring to the project. As far as funders wanting to find the right fit, again, in terms of their goals, their interests, making sure that overlaps with what you're able to provide, identifying then with competitors what might be your unique advantage. What does your organization bring to this particular area that others might not? Do you have special expertise, special access to the community, experience in providing this service before? Just something that will set you apart from the competition. And then with partners, making sure that whoever you identify can complement you. Hopefully, they have strengths in maybe areas that you don't. And so you each bring something unique to the project and can work together to accomplish the overall goals. Really good to have kind of a long-term development of relationships with those partners, but then also with funders. A lot of times funders will provide funding for multiple years to the same organization if they have determined that you're capable and that you're able to provide what you say you will. And so, and that you, again, manage their money well and provide all the reporting that you need to. So always good to kind of have those ongoing relationships with funders so that hopefully that will lead to continued support going forward. Making sure you're targeting your proposals, again, really identifying opportunities to apply to that make sense as far as what you're able to provide, what you're proposing to do, and what the funder is interested in supporting. And hopefully, avoid spending time on trying to convince the funder that they would like to fund you as opposed to what they said they were going to fund, which may not be, quite as perfect a fit as if you were to find a funder that actually maybe is specifically targeting the area that you're working in. Again, following those guidelines from the sponsor, making sure that you're reviewing all the requirements in terms of what needs to be provided and what format it needs to be in, so that everything is as the funder wants to see it when you do submit your documents. And hopefully trying to write concisely. I know a lot of times it can be really hard. We like to talk about our organizations. We get excited about the work. We can probably go on for pages and pages, but we do want to try to keep it concise, say what we need to say and what the funder is looking for, but not, go over any page limits or anything, or go into more detail than we necessarily need to for that particular funding opportunity. And again, making sure that you're tailoring it to that specific funder. You can't necessarily just pull a proposal off the shelf and submit it to multiple funders. You would need to really make sure that you're speaking to what the funder is looking for with that particular call solicitation, so that you are speaking to exactly what they're looking for. A few more things you can do to increase your chances of success with proposals. So try to get their attention early on in your documents. So a lot of times you'll have an opportunity to put together an executive summary that goes with your main larger proposal, or just an introduction section in the proposal. You want to make it compelling to really help them understand the need that you're trying to address, and hopefully get their attention and make them want to read the rest of the proposal and be engaged with what you're proposing to do. Try to identify what language the funder actually uses. So this can oftentimes mainly come from the solicitation itself, where you might see that they tend to use certain language over and over again, certain terminology. So kind of repeat that back to them in your proposal, so that they can see that you are kind of on the same wavelength as they are when you're writing your proposal and talking about your proposed project. Trying to strike a balance between showing that you have the expertise that's necessary, but not getting too deep into really technical jargon that might be really specific to your subject. So it's quite possible that sponsor will actually use people who are not necessarily experts in a particular field to review, to help kind of look through proposals and help them score those proposals. So not everyone who reads your proposal will necessarily be as much of an expert as you are on the topic. And so it's good to make sure that you're kind of not necessarily just using all the specific terminology that not everyone will be familiar with necessarily. Making sure that you've got a clear plan for the program, and that you really articulate it clearly in your proposal documents. Then making sure that whatever you do propose is something that you can deliver on. You don't want to overpromise and then potentially win the funding because it sounds like you can do a lot of great things, but then maybe aren't able to carry them out when it comes time to actually implement the project. Again, paying attention to the points, values for the different proposal sections, giving time and attention to what's worth the most points to hopefully increase your chance of success. And then try to put yourself in the shoes of the reviewer, potentially have someone else look at the proposal and give you some feedback. But try to think of who might be looking at the proposal, how they might be reviewing it, what they might be looking for, just to kind of help give yourself a little bit of distance from what you've written and be able to try to see it from a different perspective. Might help you actually refine what you're writing and be able to speak more directly to the people who are going to be scoring your proposal. And I put a link in here that if you want to take some time on your own to look at, it's kind of a mock example of a review panel that would be looking at proposals. It's very scientific in nature. because it's the NIH, so the National Institutes of Health in the US, but it's more about the process. So you don't need to really understand all the different terminology of what they're talking about with some of the proposals that they're discussing. But I think it's interesting to see what it might look like for a review panel to discuss and review papers and then give them scores. So that might be something you want to look at on your own. All right, so this is kind of our first point where we can break into some different breakout groups. And this is where I mentioned the handouts. There was one that was kind of a booklet. I think it's like 12 pages. And I thought you could start to look at least the first two activities in here, the exercises, just to start thinking through, you know, what would you potentially be applying for funding for? Try and envision what you might need funding for in your organizations, and try to answer the questions in light of that, and just kind of work through what's there to kind of think through the process of what the different elements that would be included in the proposal that you might be asked for, just to start to envision what those would look like. So Amy, I'm not sure.
Well, first of all, I'm wondering if you could just share a screen and just show us that handout.
Absolutely.
Just very clearly point out which parts folks need to work on.
I opened the rooms there. I can
Okay.
But bring it back.
So yeah, this is the exercise booklet. That's what it's called. And then, yeah, it's just the first two. So it's kind of pages 2. Oh, sorry, 1. I guess I started numbering that 1. Just 1 and 2, I guess.
Okay.
Or you could go into 3, but I don't know that we'll have time necessarily for that. But it's more just to kind of start through the process, thinking through these things. So.
Okay, so that looks pretty clear in there. So hopefully the folks who are in the breakouts now have the handouts and it makes sense. Charlie, did you bring people back?
Yeah, I brought people back, but I'm sending them back out now.
Okay. And it looks like you were able to put Senegal and South Africa together again, and
Yeah, I think I did, and then I combined the group that we had already combined. Yeah.
Nicole, are you going to talk about like resources where people can research grants? Good spots?
I don't have anything in here on specifics, but what I thought I would do is follow up with some resources.
Sorry, Amy, Nicole, the handout that you mentioned, I don't have it. Is it on the chat?
Harry, it should have been sent out. I think for me yesterday. I don't know. Probably for you, it might be in the morning.
Yeah, I don't have that email. The only email that I have is only about enhancing team creativity.
Okay, I
yes,
can send it.
same from my side.
I'll send it out to you again.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Nicole, if you're able to put it in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, it's just a local file. I don't know. Can I share a file?
I think
Or would
so.
it have to be a link?
No, I think you can share a file.
Okay.
Let's see, how would you do that?
There we go.
Can I see the chat right now? Chat. That's all the way down here.
Did that come through?
Yes. Yep. So Cootie, Nicole just put the handout in the chat. Are you able to see that?
Yes, I receive it. Yes, thank you. Just downloading it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. All right, and both Harry and Cootie were in the same room. I don't, can people can't access the chat in the breakouts, can they?
My experience has been no, but it's been a while since I've.
Yeah, I don't think they can, but I'm resending it to all of them right now.
Okay.
So on their email, so they should be getting it soon.
Okay. Here, I can just go in the other rooms and see if everyone got it.
Maybe we can give them to like 5 after. Is that? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. I can close it at 11:05 for us.
Realize that I've been muted.
No.
Yeah, so when I came back, what I said was that several people had not gotten the handouts, but they seemed to understand the activities. They were progressing. So I'm just going to assume that everybody who didn't come back knew what they needed to do.
Are you all seeing the full screen version of my slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm never sure because it, it shows me the presenter view.
Mm-hmm.
And
right, I can see the full screen. Be right back. And Nicole, I'm assuming that you'll leave some time for questions, asking people.
Yeah, I'm hoping so.
What their challenges have been, because they all receive USAID funding.
Mm-hmm.
So there is certainly that experience, and I think they're wanting to diversify the grants that they're getting in
Mm-hmm.
terms of identifying other funding partners. So that is a present, I think, desire and challenge.
Okay. Yeah, and what I was saying before is I can certainly follow up with some additional resources as far as looking for funding opportunities. There's probably a few other things where I can just provide some resources that didn't really have time to go over in the actual presentation, but
because it seems like you have some great practices in terms of things that you just scan regularly to see what's out there.
yeah, well, and I probably have more limited experience with some of the funders that they might be interested in pursuing, other than US government, obviously, but I can put together kind of a list of resources for that.
I think that would be really helpful.
Then we want to go ahead and pull them back.
Yep, doing that now.
Thanks. Okay, good. Looks like we got folks back from the breakouts. I don't know if you had a chance to look through the rest of that document, but like I said, it's a number of exercises that would kind of help you think through the different things that would help you prepare to put a proposal together. So, you know, hopefully that's a resource that you can use kind of on your own as you're thinking about preparing to put together proposals for different funders and opportunities. So I'm gonna move on to talking about managing grant projects. This first thing I hear actually is one of the other handouts that was sent out called the project charter. So basically it's just kind of a document where you can summarize all the different elements of what your project is, you know, how much money you have, how much time, who are the key players, what their roles are on the project. So it kind of gives you a place to quickly refer to that will have all of those things relevant to the project in one spot. It's also important that you make sure you understand what the rules are that the sponsor has for your project. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means and kind of what that looks like. Ensuring that you engage with stakeholders to hopefully open doors that might need to be to help move your project along and to eliminate any barriers that might potentially stand in the way. Trying to identify and then manage any potential risks that would come up to keep the project on track. Then throughout the project, making sure that you can monitor and control. Again, really just kind of helping make sure that you are meeting your targets, understanding kind of what you're supposed to be doing and making progress. And then reporting on your progress, and then finally kind of demonstrating success, since ultimately you want to be able to say that you did what you set out to do, and then that can potentially lead to additional funding in the future. So I mentioned that grant funding comes with rules and regulations. Generally, these are known as terms and conditions that the sponsor would have that they require you to follow as you carry out your project. This is where, I know I mentioned we're not really talking about the award phase where you're actually kind of negotiating the terms of your agreement with the sponsor. But one thing I did want to mention is that it might be good to just have someone who has some kind of legal knowledge and expertise to rely on when you are at that stage, just to make sure that you understand what all these rules are that the sponsor is outlining for you, and you know that they can potentially help you negotiate things if you're not sure that you're able to agree to certain legal terms, depending on your organization and how it's set up. So you do want to ensure kind of at the start of the project that everyone who is working on the project understands what the terms are and is clear on like certain things that you might not be allowed to spend money on, or just different terms that you would need to be aware of in carrying out the project. If the sponsor requires you to keep certain records or follow certain procedures, definitely helpful to have internal policies to make sure that everyone follows those, or just something even as simple as a checklist so that everybody can make sure that they are abiding by all those different rules. as kind of a best practice, it's really helpful to have just documents, again, that people can follow, can easily, check themselves on, make sure that if there's certain policies you need, especially on any of the financial aspects, that tends to be where a lot of these terms and conditions apply, is on, what you can and can't spend money on. So, just certain things that you might need to make others aware of. It's just kind of helpful to make sure that you have some set procedures in place to do that. And then if you're ever not sure about how something applies to your project or to your organization, ask the sponsor to clarify. It's always better to understand those things upfront rather than to potentially, do the wrong thing and have to correct it later. So as I mentioned, each sponsor is going to have some different ways they go about this, and as far as what they're telling you are these regulations you have to follow. I mentioned here what the US government uses. It's got a really long name, but the short term is the Super Circular, or 2 CFR 200, which is the Code of Federal Regulations number that corresponds to these grant regulations. They're quite lengthy. They're all available online and you can search them, which if you're interested, that's another link I can provide. I don't recommend necessarily reading through all of them or, just kind of front to back. It's more of kind of a reference to go to if you had questions about what a certain grant regulation means or what a definition is of something. So those are kind of the general rules, again, from the US government that apply to basically all of their grants. But then there are usually going to be some specifics from the sponsor that are for your project. Some of them are just going to be, what is the start and end date? How much funding do you get? What are you expected to do with that funding? What are the outcomes, the scope of the project? So kind of what just is involved in implementing this project. If there is some kind of involvement required by the sponsor, I mentioned the cooperative agreement arrangement that some sponsors might use. It will include that. So just kind of what the expectations are of how the sponsor will help you implement the project, and some information on points of contact, who is actually going to manage the day-to-day and kind of be your main point of contact, and who might be in charge of more of the administrative side of things. That might be the person you would need to go to if you needed to ask for more time or to revise the budget, something that's more official that needs a signature. So that might be a different person. Just good to be aware of kind of who those contacts are, and all of that should be outlined again in your grant document that includes the different terms and conditions. So as I said, it's not really something you need to necessarily memorize, but it's just more that you need to be aware of when to consult the guidelines and just make sure that you're following all the rules. Sometimes there might be situations with pass-through funding where the funding goes from the sponsor to some intermediary, whether it's a government agency or another organization, and then down to the actual implementing organization. So there just might be different levels of rules in those kinds of situations, just something to be aware of. The sponsor has their rules. There might be some at that middle level as well. And similarly, if your organization was a subawardee to a partner organization who is actually the one that received the grant, that you would have to still abide by the same rules that the sponsor puts onto what we call the prime recipient. So that would be the main organization who's directly receiving the funding. The prime organization would most likely be informing you of any of those rules that would apply at the sub-awardee level as well. So I wanted to spend a little time on stakeholder management, which, again, talking about this in the context of projects, but certainly I think as organizations, all of us have stakeholders, regardless of whether it's specific to a project or just more broadly for the organization. Basically, it's anyone who kind of has some kind of an interest in the project, in, you know, what you're doing, what the outcomes are going to be, and is, you know, hopefully invested in its success in some way, even though they might not be directly involved in helping to implement the project. So a few examples of who this might be: obviously your sponsor, any partners you might be working with, whether officially or more, you know, unofficially, that they're not necessarily part of the project itself, but still could be a partner that you work with. People in the community that would have some level of influence, government officials who might need to approve certain activities before they can take place. So kind of a lot of different levels of stakeholders. And we think of them as they have, again, an interest in the project, and the project might affect them in some way, but also that they can affect the project in certain ways. And so it's definitely good to be kind of aware of their potential role in having that impact. So they could impact just kind of how you're doing things, processes, or actually what the results of the project would be. Some of them might actually make some kind of a financial contribution. A lot of times it's probably more likely that it would be a contribution that is more of a non-financial category, I guess, where it would be, you know, providing some kind of access to things, or, you know, helping introduce you to important people you might need to know to help carry out the project. And they do have the potential to be a benefit to the project, or to potentially, you know, not necessarily that they want to harm the project, but that they could potentially stand in the way if, you know, if they have certain access that you need, or that there just might be some additional hoops to kind of jump through, you know, some additional requirements that you'd have to follow in order to get their participation. And so there is some level of needing to motivate them then to provide whatever contribution you're hoping that they will give to the project that might be needed. So you need to think about how you would potentially encourage them to provide that contribution. What is their motivation? You know, what are the potential costs to them, even if it's just, you know, it costs their time and effort, not necessarily money. And also, you know, what's the benefit or outcome to them that they're interested in? And then hopefully you can align their expectations with what you have envisioned for the project in terms of its purpose, deliverables or outcomes, the actual scope of the project, what, you know, what you're planning to do, and their potential contributions to it. So really, this process of stakeholder management then is just kind of engaging with these different stakeholders to hopefully enhance the success of your project, because ideally they can provide something valuable to assist. So obviously this is going to take some time and resources on the organization's part. And both of those, as we know, are limited. We can't all just spend all of our time and effort on managing stakeholders. We have to do the actual project activities as well. So you do want to kind of determine how best to spend your limited time on getting the outcomes you want from your stakeholders and getting their contributions and input. So you're going to need to take some time to prioritize then, you know, who you need to engage with the most, how significant of an impact they might have on the project. And that could be positive or negative. You know, they could kind of put up barriers in ways that if you're not potentially engaging them in the way that they expect, that, you know, they may not provide that contribution that you're looking for or be reluctant to do so. So certainly giving priority to those stakeholders that have that ability to have some kind of significant impact on the project. Then conducting an analysis to, again, identify who are the stakeholders, make some assessment as far as their, you know, what is their interest, their motivation, and what you want them to provide, being able to prioritize, and then analyze and, you know, make sure you can actually provide what's needed in order to get their input, their contribution. And potentially this might be something that's ongoing throughout the project. You might need to provide them updates on how things are progressing. It's not necessarily just a one-time thing that you can do and then move on and say that you've accomplished what you needed to with your stakeholders. So you do want to make sure you're developing that trust over time. Again, getting their contributions at various stages when needed throughout the project. And then something to keep in mind is that your stakeholders have their own stakeholders. So, you know, their interest in the project may also be dependent on kind of their network of people and who they need to answer to. And so there may be kind of multiple layers of thinking about stakeholders and their relationships to your project or your organization. So I wanted to talk a little bit about risk management. Again, this is in the context of thinking about projects and grant funded ones in particular. So we may kind of think about risk in the traditional sense as being the chance or probability of loss of, you know, something negative happening. That definition has kind of evolved over time to more be about just the effect of uncertainty on, in this case, your project, but whatever it is you're trying to do. You know, certainly we tend to think about risk as having some kind of a potential negative outcome because we want to prevent that from happening. But really, any kind of uncertainty where we don't necessarily know the answer to something or can't predict until something actually happens within our project can, you know, cause just a little bit of unsettled response to things. So it's kind of just important to think through those in advance and be aware of what might come up that could affect the project in some way. So any of these risks that we might talk about can potentially impact the operations, just the actual day-to-day of what we're doing. Costs certainly could lead to some kind of a cost increase. Your human resources, so your ability of your staff to do what they need to do. The organizational reputation, so your actual, you know, how you're viewed by others and your ability to successfully manage and implement a project. And then relationships with stakeholders are certainly something that can be affected as well. So why we consider risk then? just kind of to be aware of what the purpose is of engaging in risk management. Certainly important to be flexible, adaptable, just because we know that situations change over time and things that we might not have expected might come up as we go through things, and it's easier to navigate them if we can be flexible and adapt to those situations and prepare to do that. So this idea of business or operational continuity, being able to still carry on our operations, our regular business, despite potential interruptions, again, being able to kind of navigate around these things is important to still maintain our ability to do the work. Just the ability for the organization to survive in the long term can be affected. So this idea of organizational resilience, being able to withstand, uncertainty or, potential negative impacts of things is important for the organization to survive and continue to do the work it sets out to do. And then thinking about the idea of slack. So it's kind of just the idea of having some room to move things around if you need to. A lot of times we think about that in terms of budget, needing to take money from one area of a budget and relocate it somewhere else because some costs have changed over time. But you can also think about it in terms of time, allowing additional time for things to happen if you need, just to be able to take more time as things arise that you might not have expected, or just even with your personnel to make sure that multiple people can do different tasks, so that if one person becomes unavailable, you don't just have a sudden halt to things because they can't do that one thing you need to be done in order for the project to continue. So the idea of cross-training, or making sure that you have multiple people who can fill different roles on certain projects is important. So we try to put this in the context then of developing a risk management plan for any project. So ideally kind of at the start of the project to identify and think about what resources you would use to actually address any potential risks. So, who might be involved, what is their role and responsibility when it comes to risk management? Are there any potential costs with risk management? Are there alternatives to doing things the way you planned, where it might cost more to do it that way, but it might be necessary just depending on the circumstances? And then timing and scheduling, just thinking about revisiting your risk plan multiple times over the course of the project, making sure that you're monitoring these things as they go on, and potentially identifying new risks that might arise that you hadn't considered at the beginning of the project. And each risk that you identify, you would want to assess kind of the probability that it will happen. So, how likely is it, and what impact it would have? How significant of an interruption might this be to the project if it were to happen? And that's kind of how you can prioritize them. You can come up with ways of addressing them, and give them some kind of a priority in terms of how much time you can focus on each of them, based on what's most urgent, what is going to have the greater impact on the project, what's most likely to happen, so that you can monitor accordingly. They have another breakout activity. I think initially I was doing the stakeholder management and the risk analysis worksheets, but I think maybe we can just focus on the stakeholder analysis one. The risk management is probably more relevant if you have a specific project in mind. And I am aware that we're maybe a little bit behind on time. I want to make sure we have some time at the end for questions. So maybe we can just take 10 minutes to do breakouts again and have you think about who are your stakeholders. Again, these can be specific to a project, but I think most likely everybody can think of just general stakeholders for the organization more broadly, and to think about, you know, what you would want them to contribute, how you might motivate them to do that, and kind of what priority you might put them in terms of how significant of an impact they could have on the organization.
And Nicole, is that also in the worksheet, those questions you just asked?
Yeah, so this was a separate worksheet. It is called YALI Workshop Stakeholders Form. It's a Word doc.
Okay, and Charlie, did you just send that one out, or would that be helpful to put in the chat as well?
Yeah, I sent those out, and I can try to put it in the chat.
Okay, I have it here. I'm gonna do that. So yeah, I just dropped it in the chat.
All right. Are there any questions before we go into breakout? Looks like everyone's ready.
I feel like the time always goes faster than you think it will. Like 2 hours seems like so much. Anyway, I think you're muted.
It always goes faster. 2 hours really isn't much at all.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this will, you know, just give folks an opportunity to think through some of these dimensions. And obviously there's more that they would need to do in terms of, you know, thinking through their grants management systems.
Yeah.
And there's, yeah, a lot of investment, I think, that needs to go into grants, that unless you're part of a huge organization is kind of added on to people's responsibilities.
Yeah.
In a way that makes this a challenging kind of funding.
Yeah. I know we complain sometimes about all the bureaucracy with the university, but there are some benefits to having all of the infrastructure already there.
Yes. That is true. And the university, I mean, does help us with gaps. And, you know, for example, we, now I'm going to stop the recording.
It may be funny to think about like why we plan things if we know things are going to change, but always good to have a plan that you're working towards, and you know, you can make adjustments, kind of small adjustments along the way without hopefully causing too much chaos in the process, that you can make small adjustments and not just kind of you know, go along however the project takes you, and still have an idea of what your overall goal is and a plan for getting there. You certainly, again, want to have this idea of flexibility, able to adapt along the way when things come up that, you know, just might change what you had planned. But, you know, again, still having an idea of where you're going, how you're going to get there, and being able to have that control over the project to bring it back on track when you need to. And certainly it's constantly something that you're just needing to refine and adjust along the way. I think nothing ever goes 100% according to plan. So there's always a need to be able to make those small adjustments as you go based on whatever the conditions are that you're operating in. So the idea of monitoring then is really making sure you're aware of status throughout the project, gathering information to make sure you understand where the project stands, looking back at your original plan and seeing where there might be differences between where you are now and where you thought you would be. And then also considering the risks you've identified, tracking kind of where you are they more or less likely than where you thought they would be when you started, identifying potential new risks. And then the idea of controlling, so making sure that you can actually keep the project on track, you know, see where things might have taken a different course and you need to correct, or you need to prevent something coming up, interfering with the project. Taking care of that risk management, just actually following through with those plans that you put into place, making adjustments where you, if necessary, need to change the schedule, you need to adjust with your budget, change kind of how you're allocating resources along the way to make sure, again, that you can reach your end goal. And then if you make significant enough changes that you update your plan so that you're not just operating with your original plan that might become a bit outdated as things progress, but that you can update that and have kind of a revised idea of where you're going and how to get there. And if you see things that are really deviating quite significantly from the original plan, that you know, you think about whether you need to revise things like the budget, the timeline, or what activities you might be doing. And certainly communicating with your sponsor if you need to make significant changes, if you need to actually revise the budget because, you know, things have changed quite significantly and you need to put potentially more money into personnel, and they would need to approve that in advance. Again, that's where it's important to know those terms and conditions when you might need to seek permission from the sponsor. Small deviations, usually that's not necessary, but you know, something bigger would be something you want to communicate with them about. So part of monitoring and controlling too is then reporting. So making sure that you're communicating with the sponsor periodically, however often they require you to, just what updates you have about the project and kind of where things stand and where you're going. So certainly want to make sure that anyone who's involved in the implementation of the project is contributing to the reports so that they can give you the best information on what is actually taking place and what's realistic in terms of where you thought you would be and where you actually are. This is going to give your sponsor and stakeholders evidence that you are progressing along the way you hopefully should be with your project. You know, it's kind of gives them an idea of where things stand so that it doesn't take till much later in the project to realize maybe something needs to be adjusted. And ideally you want to provide information that's both quantitative, if you can quantify, any outcomes that you've had, as well as just qualitative, descriptive information on how you're achieving your objectives and progressing with your activities. Again, this will also help with your risk management, just because it kind of gives you a snapshot of what have we done recently on the project, what are we hopefully doing in the near future, so that it gives you a little bit of an outlook into the future to make sure that you can identify something that might, take things off track, and again, exert that control to get it back on track if needed. Because, this is kind of a requirement with the sponsor generally to provide this reporting and to give them updates. It hopefully demonstrates to them that you're being responsible, that you're making progress, and that hopefully they would be willing to consider future funding, because you're ideally making that progress and working towards those goals that you set out with your project. It can also help with the sponsor when they need to answer to their stakeholders. They have a report hopefully of what you're doing, and they can say, here's how we're justifying the funding that we're providing, look at what this organization is doing. So it can be really helpful to them as well to be able to pass that information on. But certainly it also is not meant to take the place of communicating regularly with your sponsor. If they're asking you for quarterly reports, but something comes up before the end of the quarter that maybe they should be aware of, it's certainly good to let them know, so that hopefully it's not the first time they're finding out about it is when they get your report. So a few things with reports then, just to keep in mind. Again, sponsors are all different in terms of what they might require, but generally they're likely going to have a set interval of when they want to know, an update from you. So quarterly, monthly, annually, potentially, certainly at the end of the project for a final report. Generally, all of this information, you'd be able to consult those terms and conditions to find out when you need to submit reports, what to include, kind of, again, progress, status, what you're forecasting coming up in the near future. If you had certain targets you've been aiming for, kind of, again, those milestones as you're going through the project, did you achieve them? Did you potentially miss them? And can you provide an explanation as to why? If you're anticipating having to request any changes, whether it's to the budget or the scope or the timeline, that again, you communicate that to them in the reports. Making sure you know what to provide as far as financial reports, how you're proceeding with your expenditures as you implement the project. Making sure you know how to submit, who to submit. Sometimes there's online systems that you have to log into to submit, or you might just email them to the sponsor. And making sure you're doing that by the deadline they've set out for you. Certainly reports and money are closely linked, being able to provide updates. And especially the financial side of things would be important to make sure that you're getting then payments from the sponsor according to that. So certainly want to make sure that you're meeting all of those requirements so that you do get paid on time. And certainly plan ahead if you need to, especially get information from partners you might be working with. to help put into the report, that you're giving them enough time to provide that information to you, and then can include that into your report that you submit. So the other hopefully point of putting together reports is to actually then demonstrate success, to be able to say, here's what we said we would do, and yes, we did accomplish that, and here's, you know, the details on that. And so certainly want to be reporting on the specific outcomes of your project when you write these reports, following whatever format the sponsor requires, or, you know, creating your own template to use, you know, based on what you were provided as far as what the sponsor expects of you in terms of the work that the project is meant to undertake. Putting out information publicly about what your projects are accomplishing, you know, what your successes are. You know, always good to have information out there in the media, or, you know, ways of promoting what you have done, just as long as you've cleared it with the sponsor and make sure that they're okay with you providing that information publicly. Making sure that you're providing enough information in your reports, so it's thorough but not too lengthy. You can always add annexes if you need to, if there's more detail that you might want to get into. Just don't be excessive with any of those. You know, really hopefully keep it to what information the sponsor kind of needs to know to be able to follow what's been going on with your project. Try to avoid making any conclusions about the overall project until you've actually completed and you're writing your final report. Since, you know, you won't have gotten to really the end of the project until you're at that point. And then also take the opportunity to use final reports to summarize the project for your own purposes, again, whether it's for public information, you know, media, press releases, or just kind of your own internal record keeping in terms of what you've accomplished and what your projects have achieved. And that is all I have as far as content. I know we don't have a lot of time here, but certainly if anyone has questions, happy to answer. Thanks, Benny.
All right, Nicole, I don't know if you're seeing the chats.
I just saw one.
Yes, just a thank you.
Just some thanks. Yeah. Well, thank you all.
All right. Well, it looks like maybe there aren't questions now. And Nicole, thank you so much for offering your experience and this really nice overview of what it takes to write a grant and manage one. And also thank you for your offer to provide some additional resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we'll make sure that those get around to everyone, particularly on, you know, good sources to go to look for grants, or look for calls for proposals, notices of funding. I think that would be of interest to everyone. Excellent. So again, many thanks for being with us today. And tomorrow we will meet here, same time, same place. And we will be focusing on sustainability, ensuring business sustainability, and building and sustaining healthy teams. And that will be Dr. Dmitriev and Dr. Karam, who have been with us already. They will be joining us again. So we will look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Charlie will send out the evaluations, and I'll also send out the handouts and link for tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon and evening. Take care, everyone.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.